Hey, greetings from Pearson, and Schmidt. Thanks for clicking on this little podcast, webinar, book review, Zoom review, whatever you want to call it. We're recording this on Wednesday, March 8th, and I need to come clean. I've started GoFundMe pages for David and Jason because yesterday we had a fabulous webinar and I forgot to hit the record button. And I'm indebted to both of them, both of you guys, I think forever. And thank you for doing this. And I thought last night, well, really, I planned it that way so we would have a dress rehearsal. So today is going to be fantastic. So thanks for listening, everyone. And this is a little bonus to your weekly staff meeting e-news issue number 550. And we're talking about the book, The Four Workarounds, Scrappy Strategies from the World's Scrappiest Organizations for Tackling Complexity. And my guest today, I'm just amazed that you guys are willing to do this again. Thank you. Jason is my son, Jason Pearson. You can reach him at pearpod.com. And Jason has a whole portfolio of projects that he's done over the years, storytelling, film industry, creative communications, and you'll get a little more from him there. David Schmidt, thank you for being here again. And David has bailed me out more times than I dare count. When I had the privilege of leading Willow Creek Association and what was then called Christian Management Association. David, you'll remember you were constantly at the whiteboard with a brain trust in the room trying to figure out what the mission is and whatever. And so many times you put something on the board and we just kind of like, where did that come from? And so your ability as a consultant, even still today, is phenomenal. Wiseplanning.net is your website, and then you can reach me at managementbuckets.com if there are any questions that you have from this Zoom review. Just go there and you can send me an email and I can put you in touch with David and Jason, who will have all the answers. But David, thank you for coming back yet one more day. Hopefully this one will work.
You bet. Glad to do it, John.
And Jason, you're not surprised. And when people say, when did your dad start losing it? You can say, well, I think it was around March 2023. So this is a really, really interesting book, as we talked about yesterday, and our listeners will get in on it, why it's so interesting. And but there's a few cautions that we'll talk about. But what I love about it is, imagine a guy who's a professor at Oxford University with a PhD from Cambridge, Gates scholar. He uses the three little pigs in his book as kind of a metaphor for talking about the four workarounds. And I think it's a great metaphor. You know, the big bad wolf huffed and puffed and blew the house down for the two little pigs, and then they joined up with the third pig, who had built his house of brick. And they also did some workarounds so the big bad wolf couldn't get in there. But if you read the section in this book on the four workarounds, it's really hilarious. And how much does the big bad wolf really need his bacon? And he gives several suggestions. But it's a great, if I were a CEO still today, I would start with this, with a 4-hour session. I would buy books in advance for 4 people, ask each one to kind of become a little expert on each of the 4 workarounds. And then I would start with the 3 little pigs, a little brainstorming session. He kind of gives you an exercise in the book. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just give you the quick definitions of the 4 workarounds. And then David and Jason and I are going to kind of, pick the ones that are kind of fun for us. We're going to talk about it. And we hope that you'll find this helpful. And we think that there's some great value here. The first workaround, piggyback. Use a piggyback when there are other people or relationships that you can leverage. Some great examples of that. Number two, a loophole. Use a loophole when there's a set of formal or informal rules that you dislike. And the author kind of gets out there on the edge, even on the moral edge. And that's what's kind of intriguing about this book. Just to me, it pushes you back. Jason, Doug, David, I'm wondering if this caused you to reassess your worldview and core values. And I'd like you to say yes, because we got to move on.
Okay.
We'll talk about it later. Number three, roundabouts. Use a roundabout when there is a self-reinforcing behavior that can be influenced. And again, is it going to be legal? Is it going to be moral? Interesting. And then the last one, the next best. Use the next best when there are available resources that can be repurposed. Now, all three of us have worked with lots of nonprofits over the years, and I think nonprofits are pretty good at reconstituting something to make it a bit better. But in the book, there's about 150 pages of really significant examples, and then the second part of the book on how to use workarounds, and they're clever, unexpected, economical, and effective. So that kind of gives us the overview. But David, after you said yes to doing this before you'd read the book, of course,
right,
because you and I both thought the title and the subtitle are so fabulous. So, but I'm guessing you had a little angst in it. So kind of give our listeners a little bit of the caution that we've talked about from this book.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for inviting Jason and me onto the podcast here, and just good to be with you both and talk through this. Yeah, the book title, just very interesting title, the idea of workarounds. I think just the notion of having scarce resources sometimes in life, whether it's personal or it's professional or it's in a corporation, we look for ways to get things done, or if we feel like we're knocking our heads on the wall or the ceiling of a leader or a situation or a history that we can't get around, we're looking for workarounds. This book, what put me off at the beginning was just this author, just like you said, John, he uses a wide spectrum of examples here, some of which are, in my opinion, more ethically questionable, morally questionable. And yet he had some wonderful ones in here as well. So I think as a reader, I would just encourage any reader, first of all, get the book. Secondly, hold on to your moral compass in your left hand, hold the book in your right hand, and you'll be fine. And you'll say, no, I don't believe that. That's not how I would do it. I don't believe in that. But I can learn from it, just like we can learn from lots of dark stories in history. We can learn from them. And I think it's a good stretching experience for us as we read it. So the word of caution is just if you're easily offended, probably not your book. If you're a good thinker, this is your book to begin to think about what are ways we can make adjustments to get things done.
Yeah. Jason, in your work over the years, I'm so proud of your heart you have, like for the unborn and for those who are victims of human trafficking. What was your gut upon that? And of course, you mentioned that you don't read books, you listen to books, and Peter Drucker always would try to encourage team members, figure out your coworkers and your boss, are they readers or listeners? And you're a listener. I'm a reader.
Yeah, I was intrigued with this book, and it was not what I expected. So I love the cover of the book. I mean, if you just look at that image of the rabbit with a turtle strapped to it, I mean that would get you enough to open it up and read it. But I found the book too, like you, David, that I found myself, he wanted me to root on for the deviant, and he actually uses that word, the deviants in the book. I found myself almost like watching the TV show Breaking Bad, where about the second episode you realize, hey, they want me to cheer on the bad guy in this show. So some of the deviants he puts up, squatters and hackers and debt avoiders were some of the ones that I wrote down as. But when you step back and you look at it, there are some really interesting ideas here that I think can be applied to a wide spectrum, including ministries and churches.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
Jason, he talked about scrappy organizations as a type of organization that oftentimes needs to depend on or look at and utilize workarounds. And he described a scrappy organization as one that's oftentimes they're small, but they're feisty, resourceful. They operate sometimes at the fringes of legacy organizations or institutional giants. They have to think quickly out of necessity. And despite some apparent clumsiness, they often persist and succeed because of their unconventional methods. And I think that's precisely what we've seen in terms of a lot of startups over the years. It's people who said there's a different way to do this. So that we go all the way back to the beginning of the industrial age and Henry Ford's era, all the way through to the current explosion of artificial intelligence. We're watching scrappiness prevail. And that's a skill set that I think the leaders that are listening today can begin to think about. How do I cultivate a scrappy attitude and posture in my organization? Because he's saying here that it's going to take that to survive and thrive in today's context.
Preach it. You remind me, David, when I had the privilege of working with Seattle's Union Gospel Mission, this fabulous ministry to the homeless and addicted people, et cetera, in Seattle. During the years that Jeff Lilly was the CEO and president, he had 7 core values, and one of them was innovative and scrappy. And I'd never heard of another nonprofit or even a for-profit using the word scrappy as one of their core values. But 3 cheers for Seattle's Union Gospel Mission.
Good word. Yeah.
Right. So you see on the screen there, the author, Paulo, we'll just call him Paulo, because I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He's from Brazil, but he's at Oxford in the UK. He kind of gives an overview, and he emphasizes the importance to fail productively and repeat the process rather than to conduct methodical assessments and define contingency plans. Now, David, you and I with strategic planning, we kind of like contingency plans, but I've been reading the literature lately, and I just reviewed a book a few weeks back called Burn the Boats by a guest who is a guest on Shark Tank occasionally. And his subtitle is "Throw Plan B Overboard." And so I'm willing to be influenced a little bit more by just kind of just keep working at it. But here are the 4 workarounds. And Jason, I remember in that fabulous webinar that we did yesterday, you talked on one of the piggyback workaround. You talked about Cola Life. That organization that did piggybacking in Zambia. Give us a little bit on that.
Yeah, this was my favorite illustration in the book, and a woman named Jane Berry identified that the second biggest killer of kids in sub-Saharan Africa, and specifically Zambia, was diarrhea, and kids were dying from this without the use of anti-diarrhea medicine, which is pretty simple. But while they were there, they found they were in the remotest parts and they could always get a Coca-Cola. So they said, how come this can get distributed, but the medication can't? So they developed this unbelievable, and I actually went and found a photo of the packaging, and it's
really?
Actually, it won a design award. And so we can include that in the notes. But they found that the space in between the Coca-Cola bottles was perfect to design a little cup that could contain the medicine. It was actually a measuring cup that you pour the thing in and mix it with water. And they were able to distribute this medicine for free using Coca-Cola, piggybacking on the Coca-Cola distribution. And so they're called aid pods, and just an excellent example of that.
Yeah. Piggybacking. Yeah. David, anything jump out at you in that one, piggybacking? And I mean, goodness, you've worked with some major clients around the country, around the world. I'm sure you've seen it. But maybe nonprofits, especially the ones we work with, don't recognize it and don't really drill deep to understand how to maximize it.
Yeah, I don't think we fully can appreciate, like Jason's example here is just, I think, one of the finest ones where you have sort of what you would call, the way the author describes it, you have other resources or relationships that you can leverage. And so one that strikes me is, I'm thinking about an organization like Mercy Ships, Operation Mobilization, where these are actually piggyback examples, because what they do is they bring a ship into a port for medical reasons. Operation Mobilization brings a bookstore into impoverished countries around the world, largely in the global south. And what they're doing is they actually piggyback on the relationships they have onshore. And those onshore relationships, they take advantage of, and serving them to get resources to their constituencies that they may not have readily on the ground there. And it's a good example for me of how you take advantage. In the prior case that Jason mentions, it's Coke bottles and Coke cases. In this case, it's saying, hey, we have relationships that need resources, and we can piggyback on their relationship world onshore to invite people to a ship for medical purposes, or to receive free books or buy books at low cost, and especially with Operation Mobilization, provide books that provide some spiritual resources and indicate and give people ways to rethink their spiritual life, and what they may need deep in their soul. So there's a great example for me in those ships alone, plus that, which marvelous ways in which piggyback works. Yeah.
Jason, I need to thank you again. I'm going to owe you so much for this, that you're on the road and you're in Colorado and you're still squeezing this in. But you mentioned to me the Gideon Bible.
Yeah, just looking, as I was reading this book, I look over at the bedstand. It wasn't even in the drawer. They had this out on the bedstand, and I thought this was a marvelous example of piggybacking, how to get Bibles distributed across the country, and using hotels, piggyback on hotels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. David, I'm guessing someday we're going to learn that it was a consultant that met with the Gideon organization, and he facilitated a brainstorming, and all of a sudden said, why don't we have hotels?
Yeah,
I mean, wouldn't you have loved to be in that moment?
Oh, absolutely.
And I hope for all of our listeners that these will just be prompts for some, like, oh my goodness, why are we trying to do it all ourselves? Who can we piggyback with? Well, the loophole thing, my favorite story is from there. Now, the author again is from Brazil. And so we talked about one of the states in Brazil in the Northeast region that has about 7 million people. And during COVID, the governor, who was a former federal judge, was not having any luck getting around the bureaucracy and the budgets. They weren't giving him enough money to buy ventilators from all the people that needed ventilators in his state. And they were buying them, and we all remember this, they were buying them from China, if you can imagine. And yet China had no direct flights from China to Brazil. And so the flights that would go to the US or through Germany, I don't know, he doesn't explain it much, but those ventilators were confiscated in those countries, and they never made it to Brazil. So he did this amazing loophole around the law, a former judge, now governor of the state, where they did it through Ethiopia. And I believe, if I have the story right, the people that went with the ventilators, the plane got in late and told the customs people, we got to get this going, lives are at risk. We'll do all the paperwork with you in the morning. And then they would come into the state and as they said, well, you didn't really follow the law. It says, look, at people's lives are at stake. And so that kind of touches on the moral edges of loopholes. And we're all accountable to the Lord. what are we willing to do in X situation? Can I tell everybody else what to do? No, I can't. But again, it gets back to what are your core values? What's your worldview? But I thought
this was the hardest one, I think, for me to work through, John and Jason, because his examples just really pushed the boundaries of ethics and law, and he doesn't advocate doing things that put you in jail, but he certainly gave examples of people who technically in some cases broke the law, in other cases went around it. So this is one you really have to read carefully. But in doing that, though, I remembered I had an example of one in my own life, which took me back to my college days, because he describes a loophole. He says it's a set of formal or informal rules that you dislike. And this is certainly in the case of getting these ventilators. Brazil did not like the rules that were set up for getting ventilators from China into their country. Then people were confiscating these along the way the first few times they tried. So they needed to find a way in. I can remember in college, I went to a faith-based college, Nyack College, which is now named Alliance University. It's down in the Wall Street area in Manhattan. But I can remember they gave us an assignment in school. Each week we were to do something what they called a practical work assignment, which was basically just to go out into the community and to go places and show love and learn to be a servant and care for people. And in this case, as a Christian organization, Christian school, we were invited to pray with people and just serve them. Well, a team of guys and myself went down to Brooklyn on a Friday night and went to Bedford-Stuy area. And interestingly, we came across a homeless man who was sitting on the concrete, and we just sat down with them and started talking with him and what his needs were. And I asked him, I said, "What do you need? How can we help you?" And he looked me in the eye and he said, "I need a pack of cigarettes." Now, just pause for a second. Here's the workaround. There's a set of formal or informal rules that you dislike. Something in my spirit said, you know what? I dislike this idea that we can't show love to a guy by buying him a pack of cigarettes. So I took off, went to a corner store, bought him some cigarettes and some brought the matches back, gave him the cigarettes. In that setting, I felt the loophole of inviting him, because of course we signed some pledge that said we wouldn't smoke, right? That was the late 60s and 70s, the era of pledges. Oh gosh, that's another whole podcast. But I would just say and for me at least, it's an example in my own life where a loophole, I worked through one because I felt like what mattered more to that man was at that time was that somebody listened to him and cared for him in the language he would understand. And in that moment, it was a cigarette. And in another moment might have been something else. But at least it was it was for us a way to show love and say a prayer with them and move on. And I think that's at least one I can give you that works. Yeah,
and David, then you got suspended, right? And then you went to the
No, we never told our leaders. We never told our leaders or turned the expense slips in. Right. Right. Yeah.
Okay. The roundabout is a really interesting example in the book, and in a certain country, not the U.S., public urination was a big problem. The men were urinating on the walls just as they were walking down the street, and they tried all kinds of things to do it. I put in the newsletter a little 2-minute video of some vigilantes that got this big water truck, and trying to keep the streets clean, they would be on top of the truck and use these big powerful fire hoses to literally spray the guys urinating against the wall. And it's sad, but it's a little funny. But they tried all kinds of things, and the author says that when you can connect beliefs to change behavior, people have had a lot of success. And so because this country was strongly focus on the Hindu religion, they found a Hindu goddess, I believe it was, that was the goddess of cleanliness, and they would put the picture up on the walls all over the city. Well, that helped a little bit, but not quite. But I thought that the example was pretty interesting and I thought all kinds of nonprofits that are trying to change behavior, whether it be for health purposes, for spiritual purposes, this is a pretty good chapter to read. And then the last one, then I'm going to just let you guys jump in. The next best thing is repurposing resources. It could be a temporary patch to allow people to achieve goals more quickly. And there's all kinds of interesting examples on using drones for a different purpose, et cetera. But the one that was kind of interesting to me, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's Supreme Court Justice who died in 2020. Obviously, before she was on the Supreme Court, she was an attorney, and she had a great heart for women's rights. Back in those days, the law was not treating women with equality. And so in 1972, she and her husband, who was a tax attorney, took a case to one of the circuit courts. And instead of using women's rights, she did the next best thing and found a man who had been discriminated against because he was male, not female. And so she ran this whole thing. And then, of course, they had settled law because of that. And it's a very interesting example and one that I felt good about in terms of, what she did. So if you are a kind of a fan of what everyone called notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you might enjoy that. But Jason, jump in with, pick and choose any one of these. I know you've got some great examples of these.
Well, first I got to say, Paolo, I think he's teaching at Oxford these days, and after reading The Loophole, I'm sure he's going to get audited this year. Just after reading his approach to everything. So I'm glad I'm not him. But going to the roundabout, I found an interesting example. I'm wearing a T-shirt that says "Jesus was a refugee." This is a campaign called He Gets Us, hegetsus.com, and they ran some Super Bowl commercials. You went to the website, and they invited you to get a hat or a sticker or a T-shirt. And so I went through the checkout process, and I thought this was a great example of roundabout. I kept looking, okay, what's the price? I don't see how much am I buying this T-shirt for? I get to the final checkout, and the pull-down menu says, "Go bless your neighbor. Go do something for your community." And so all of their items in their store are free. If you go to hegetsus.com, you can any of these products are free, and they just ask you to go pay it forward. Go do something nice for somebody else.
Wow.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's great. The fourth one, the next best thing, I really like that one, and the example that comes to my mind because it really fulfills the definition of what the author describes as the next best thing. He says it's when you use available resources that can be repurposed. And I think of the free wheelchair mission, which figured out how to do take a lawn chair and cut it down and attach it to bike wheels. And there's any number of places around the world where there's just not access to a classic wheelchair, or in fact, classic wheelchairs would break in 10 minutes, right? Given the terrain that people are living or working on. So I really like that one because it just says, there's people who see in a lawn chair. Somebody took a lawn chair and bike wheels and figured out how to create something, and as a result have put people with the inability to be mobile in wheelchairs that they otherwise couldn't afford. And there's scores of these examples if we start looking for them, where people have repurposed existing resources around the world. And you see this especially in the global South. I think of a coffee shop in Wheaton, Illinois, that sells jewelry and materials that are basically repurposed resources in third world countries that are end up creating a living for men and women. And we can see it in our own country on playgrounds where originally it was shredded rubber tires created a softer landing for kids on playgrounds. This is what the author's talking about, a way to think about when you're up against an issue, how are you going to work around it?
Yeah. Jason, your hegetses.com shirt reminded me that I heard at the Barnabas Group in Orange County last month, I heard a speaker from an organization called Inca Link International, INCA, Inca Link International. They work with, they have a heart for all the youth in South America and Latin America. And they told this stunning story about kids in Peru that didn't have access to clean water, et cetera. And so to tie that together as kind of a piggyback and a next best, they handed out these little wrist bracelets at the meeting. And they said, take them. So Jason, as you know, I got one for each of your 5 kids, our 5 grandkids. And but what they ask you to do, and David, you'll love this, they said, you check the box on the response form. I will help keep the faucet running by praying for Inca Link at least once a week while I wash my hands and see the Inca Link bracelet on my wrist. I mean, so that just has this power of just replicating the message and with something physical. I thought that was just brilliant. And
tell the movie theater story. I mean, that was classic.
Oh my! Well, the what I went to their little literature table after the meeting, and I told the founder and his wife that I said that was a phenomenal story, and the founder said, in the middle of the night, I woke up and I felt like God told me, tell this story whenever you're meeting with people. And the story is the founder's wife, co-founder, told the story that they were working with some kids in an extremely rural area. And somehow they got them all into vans and brought them to see their first ever movie, first time they'd ever been in a theater. And, they were just like over the top. And the young kids, I got the feeling like, maybe first, second, third graders, but from a very poor area. Their houses were hardly houses. And it was time for halfway through the movie, one of the kids said to his counselor, one of the guys, I need to go to the bathroom. And he says, okay, let's go. So they stepped out of the movie, and the kid says to his counselor, did you bring the shovel? And the counselor, like, okay, he's from a really rural area. They don't use bathrooms there. They just use a shovel. And he says, we don't need a shovel. Well, yeah, I do. No. And so he took him. He says, I'm going to show you what a bathroom looks like. He took him into the bathroom, showed him how to use the toilet. Then when he was done, he said, now you got to wash your hands. He goes back into the toilet to wash his hands in the toilet. And he says, no, there's a faucet here. And he shows him how the faucet worked, and water came out. And he said the kid washed his hands, his face. He started washing his whole body, and he just he turned it on, turned it off. He just, how does this water get in here? And he said, we got to go back to the movie. So he goes back to the movie. And the kid says to all of his friends, hey, this movie's fun, but I've just been in the bathroom, and that's a whole lot more fun. Come with me. So all these kids left the movie. So they wrapped it up with this: every time you put this on your wrist, and every time you use the faucet, at least once a week, be praying for our organization. That's cool. Pretty good. Yeah. So
that's great.
Well, we probably need to wrap it up, but Jason, David, you probably got 1 or 2 more examples that if we got time for them, and jump in.
Yeah, I think I have a closing thought more than anything, John. I'm reminded, as in reading this book and this conversation today, of a quote by Peter Drucker, which goes something like this. He said, in times of turbulence, it's not the turbulence that's the danger. It's to act with yesterday's logic. Yeah. In times of turbulence, it's not the turbulence that's the danger. It's to act with yesterday's logic. And this author really is trying to provide us 4 different ways of thinking about how to function in times of turbulence. Could be turbulence of, I want to do something good in the world, and I don't know quite how to do that. It could be an organization that's in turmoil. It could be any number of impulses we have to do something, to invent, to do good. Whatever those are, what Drucker's saying is sound, is that we get stuck in using yesterday's logic. And here we have an author who's saying, hey, sometimes the solution is not starting from scratch. It's actually a workaround. And I think that it's a good way to say. I'm reminded of just stories in the Bible where we saw Jesus create miracles of taking 5 pieces of bread and a couple of fish and multiplying them.
Great example.
As I think about that, that might be the mother of all workarounds. I don't know. That's how I would look at that. I got to give that some thought. For those of us, all your listeners who are familiar with those stories of Jesus, it's a good one. So anyway, hey, it'd be great to talk about this stuff. Thanks. Yeah.
Jason, any? Let me just mention.
I don't think.
Let me mention also, the author has a great metaphor. He says, the workarounds are more like Legos than putting a puzzle together. And he says, you kind of have to be messy. But anything else there, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think David summed it up great. The one other quick thing that came to mind was I've been working on a movie that's coming out April 14th in theaters called Nefarious.
Right.
It's a screw tape type letters meet Silence of the Lambs. Whoa. And it's got some great theology in it. But the rating, the MPAA gave us an R rating. We don't think it deserves an R rating. So our workaround is we're telling people it's R for recommended. So if you want to give us an R, we're going to tell you it's R, but it's R for recommended. So we're
that's a workaround.
People to
that's
go see it. Yeah,
and it's you have a website for that, Jason?
Yeah, whoisnefarious.com. Go check out the trailer. We have a new trailer dropping tomorrow, but there's one up there today.
Okay.
But thinking about just the scrappy organizations, I think Paulo used a lot of examples in the book that I wouldn't recommend. But I think of all the clients and people we've worked with that are scrappy. I think of churches who are sending invites to people, Bible distribution. In fact, I Googled how many Gideon Bibles have the Gideons distributed, and they've distributed 1.3 billion Bibles in hotels across the world. Mm-hmm. So isn't that incredible? In 180 countries.
Wow. With a B, billion.
With a B, yeah. So I mean, they figured out a workaround, and I applaud them for that. I think of rescue missions. Rescue missions are some of the scrappiest out there, and pregnancy resource centers. 8,900 pregnancy resources in the United States, and I think they've come up with some unbelievable solutions to help women, unwed mothers, and just with ultrasound machines and things. Every step that they're making is, and so I would encourage anyone watching this who has one of those to actually. I found that the author, the email's author, the author's email. Here's Paulo's email. We'll include this on the YouTube link. And so if you've got a what I would describe as a wholesome workaround that's not quite as devious, send it to the author, and maybe you'll be included in his next book. Or as he's teaching at Oxford, maybe he can use your example instead of a pro-choice example. So that's my wrap up.
That's fabulous, Jason. Wow, you guys, this has been so much fun. For my listeners and readers of your weekly staff meeting, be on the lookout for some more reviews. Of course, one that's coming up is The Future Normal, which came out this week also. I had previously reviewed in 2020 one of the co-authors' book called Non-Obvious Megatrends. This has got, it's an amazing book, 30 trends divided into various categories, and especially for those that work in nonprofits, they specifically point out several chapters. You might want to check out Randy Samuelson's book, Breakthrough, which I reviewed sometime back. It talks about when you have these complex problems, sometimes it's just finding what the log jam is. And then my book of the year last year was for 2022 was The Discerning Life by Steve Macchia. Steve invited me on some podcasts that I've been doing with him. And then there's a great little tool called Scamper, which has these wonderful little cards, and military intelligence figured out about 9 different ways to change a subject and to use it in a different way. And I put that in the newsletter, so be sure to read that, and you can click on the review. With your team, if you show this webinar podcast to your team, go on pause and then just ask them for one big idea as a result of listening. But I hope you'll get at least one book, maybe 4, and drill down on each of these things. So you can always email me at managementbuckets.com, and I can connect you with Jason and David. David, Jason, any last words that before we sign off here?
No, just to thank you. Thanks, John, for having Jason and myself on today. It's great to be with you and your audience, and it's a delight to think outside the lines here and explore just on the edges, which keeps us fresh and alive and in our thinking. And we certainly need that in a day where there's a lot of complexity, a lot of dis-ease in our culture. We've got an invitation here to think about how to work around some of this. And I think that as people of faith, we have an opportunity to do that in a way that shows love and respect and kindness, and hold on to our moral compass at the same time. But anyway, thanks. Great to review a book with you. Let's do it again. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be fun.
Amen. Yes.
Thanks, Jason. Anything further? Okay.
Nope.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and we're going to see if I can figure out how to turn the recording off. There we go. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.